principal of the National School of Government, Professor Busani Ngawini. Therefore, we're looking forward to a very exciting discussion. We've opened our Q&A as the speakers go through their inputs. Please feel free to write there your questions, your comments. They will be responding to them as we go along. But without much waste of time, let me hand over to our first speaker, who will deal with Dr. Mtimka, who will deal with how do we negotiate, the negotiation and consensus seeking amongst the political parties, and also the dynamics within political parties of coalitions. We know how difficult it has been to manage the various policy positions, personalities, etc., within the various political parties. Over to you, Ongam.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Doc. Greetings to the leadership. I stand on the protocol that you've just established. I've heard that said somewhere recently, so I thought it's a cool thing to say to try and avoid offending people. Please pardon my, I don't have a list of everybody whom I should be acknowledging, but yeah, I'm grateful for the invitation that I've received, especially in my new role at the Nelson Mandela University. I am in the Raymond Mhlaba Center for Governance and Leadership, and we need to get close to processes of state building as a center named after Omre, as well as a university that's based in the Eastern Cape, where much of the work is needed in terms of boosting state capacity and influencing the political to achieve the right objectives as far as, achieving development, better development outcomes. So I thought I'll take this with both hands, negotiating and consensus seeking. Whoever came up with this title knows what I love to do. So I'm grateful for that. This is something that I've devoted my time to do. So what I want to do is just 4 broad areas that I'm going to be focusing on, and I've just started my clock here just so I don't talk. We are used to 45 minutes as academics, minimum 45 minutes. So I'm trying to make sure that I stick to the time. So I want to take a broad theoretical framework or approach. And look at also the nature of decision-making in democracies. I think this is a good context for us. And then dealing with the two issues that are implied in the topic, negotiating and consensus seeking, and then also on the dynamics. So from a broad theoretical perspective, I think this is a very important slide for me, if everything else is forgotten. I subscribe to the theory that everything is interrelated, systems theory. This is something that I subscribe to, which I believe is an approach that we should take when it comes to, viewing the world and phenomena that is taking place. Within systems theory, the idea is that a system is an integrated whole whose properties cannot be reduced to those of its parts. And systems theory, or the perspective itself, is a way of looking at the universe as one whole consisting of various parts. And this was important in terms of the philosophical traditions within the social and natural sciences, and have got huge implications because, the original approach in terms of how humans saw the world was that it was this big integrated organism that needed to be respected. Mother Nature, for example, would be references to the natural world. And then in the Enlightenment, and I'd say Enlightenment in Europe particularly, because what Europe calls Enlightenment was not, in fact, global Enlightenment. Africa had been enlightened long before the period of enlightenment. China had been enlightened. The Arab world had been enlightened. The Middle East, had inspired civilizations long before Europe came into the scene and makes reference to enlightenment. Anyway, the thinking in enlightenment was that the world became viewed in a mechanistic way. And what that meant is that the natural resources could be pillaged, among many other things that happened. And then as a result of that, we saw a lot of destruction, we saw a lot of pushback from nature that says we are a whole. And if you try and manipulate different parts without due regard for how all of the parts affect others, you're going to be in trouble, and we've seen the trouble. The other thing I want to highlight, maybe I'll skip it for now, this concept of a hold-on, but I want to talk to when I get to the political parties later on. The other broad theoretical issue that I thought is important to mention is this contribution from chaos theory that phenomena have different ways in which they contribute to order in the world. So, for example, they say a butterfly flapping its wings in one corner of the world can generate, underline this, the initial conditions for what becomes a tornado elsewhere in the world. So this butterfly may be in China, generating a tornado in East London. We saw this in COVID-19. How, whether you are a lab theorist or a natural species infection theorist, the idea is that one section of Wuhan, which is a part of the world, people flapping their wings, so bats flapping their wings, being bats, ended up through the meat markets there, influencing, the meat market there. But it caused a global pandemic. Likewise, if you are a lab theorist that the pandemic came from a lab, the point is the same, that it's a butterfly flapping its wings in one corner of the world, people researching, some chemical weaponry, whatever they were doing. But what they did affected all of us globally. One, there's a war in Ukraine, and the price of maize in Africa is skyrocketing. Why did I say that? All of those things. I'm saying it, there's no action too small. There's no butterfly too small flapping its wings that cannot generate the initial conditions for a tornado elsewhere. So the reason why, again, closer to home, constitutional court justices were just acting within the institution of the constitutional court. They take a decision, imprison a former head of state, and as a result of that, we saw billions of rands worth of, consequences. The nature of democratic governance is that, one, at the core of it is that it's meant to be broad. It's meant to be about the people at large, to the extent that democracy is defined as the government of the people, by the people, for the people. But the challenge with democratic governance is that there's a lot of processes involved, because if not even a family can agree, so it's even more worse when it's broader institutions with many people. So what then happens is that political parties in democracies serve to aggregate the interests in a society, and that aggregation work happens in its own policy processes, in its own conferences, and as a result of that, we get to have preferences by these political parties. When it comes to negotiating and consensus seeking, here the reference obviously is made to the context of a government of national unity. But first, I want to talk about how we are dealing with, these two questions, the negotiation, the consensus seeking, as well as the dynamics of the system itself, in terms of party priorities and coalition priorities. I thought I'd put them together as to what is it that they are responding to. So democratic government is about how to advance the interests of society at large. If there were no power structures in society, all that would happen is that we would elect a government. Again, that process creates power structures. We will elect a government, and the government would simply study who needs what the most and deliver that. Now, we're saying governments, however, even democratic governments, are highly contested, and political parties are acting within an environment of high contestation. So I'm going to try and squeeze this in the 2.5 minutes that my clock is showing me. So if governments then are highly contested, and you've got power structures that influence the extent to which governments perform, it begs the question, how do they negotiate this space to have priorities that they can, that can help them to advance the greater good? Here is the issue in terms of which power structures or which constellations of power continue to have influence in South Africa. One, we have the power of established capital and owners of wealth in the country. What is the precise ways in which these people influence the country? One, they place limitations on the extent to which governments, for example, can raise taxes in order to achieve what is required. If there's as Thomas Piketty, advised, there's considerations of a wealth tax. Once governments start attempting to, come up with wealth tax or other mechanisms to generate more income from this class, whether it's foreign or domestic, there are usually responses, market responses. Some of those responses are through the mechanisms of stock exchanges, through the mechanisms of bond markets, through the mechanisms of responses in terms of price manipulation and other things. Now, why did I mention this? Because it's a power structure that we must contend with, that we must interpret in terms of whether it enables our work or it constrains our work. But they also, this group doesn't just exist to constrain the power of politicians. They also play a big role in employing people in manufacturing the goods and services that are needed. Now, it's beyond today, but we need a political, these political parties that have emerged, for example, in the GNU, a GNU that is seen in a positive light by this power group network. And by the way, there was some disappointment from this group because even though they expected the ANC to lose power, they didn't want the ANC to lose power beyond 45%, because at that time, at that threshold, that's the threshold in which the governing party would be vulnerable to huge ideological shifts, either to the left or to the right. And so the initial market responses when the results were announced at the lower 40s were one of panic, because at that 40%, you could have too many radical alternatives to policy. However, these parties that have been in the GNU have been able to remain on that continuum from the center left to the center right in terms of policy outlook. I was listening this week to Honorable Minister John Steenhuisen, towing the global South line, but also advancing the strategic interests of South Africa in defending the relationship with China. Anyway, an issue for another day. The other issue that our political environment is contending with is the power of political elites and their character. Now, we know that the South African state has been corrupt since time immemorial. And there's been attempts, especially since 1994, to try and transform it. And Henny van Vuuren makes the point that in 1994, what we're doing is we're not trying, it's not inheriting a good government. and which becomes bad in the democratic period. He makes the point that, in fact, it's inheriting a government that had been prone to corruption. About 574 billion had been lost from the fiscus, as Henny van Vuuren says, through corrupt dealings, among other things. So it's been a long process of attempting to transform the South African state. Yes, that is done with some degree of success in the democratic period, institutions being put in to try and regulate the behavior of politicians. And then we know that there was an attack, sustained attack on this, and there's a process now, we are told, of attempting to rebuild what was lost. But this process is not happening in a vacuum. Now, in a coalition environment, the major parties that are in the coalition have committed themselves to continuing the fight against corruption. And I'm happy that they resisted the agitations that were coming from some of the circles in the political space to create super ministries that were controlled by each political party. What they've done, they've created parties where they are shared there's shared political leadership. My view is that this should create the necessary environment for collaboration and mutual checks and balances among the political leaders in the departments that are fortunate to have deputies, senior political leadership that comes from diverse backgrounds. This one of the power of the lumpen proletariat, or what Karl Marx called the dangerous classes, is a huge issue. I mean, this week we're talking about killings in Mthatha, killings in KZN, killings everywhere, recently in the Western Cape also, where the state is attempting to, again, awaken from its slumber because groups have arisen in the country who are challenging the monopoly of the state on violence. And among the key indicators of state failure is the extent to which the state can retain that monopoly of violence. And we've seen our state being undermined severely by either groups of citizens that are mobilized by groups with nefarious interests in the July 21 unrests, or by pockets of organized criminals that are attempting to terrorize business, state, as well as other and civil society, and society in general. So this is a power that the state is awakening to, and it's good to hear that there's some processes at the level of the Government of National Unity to deal with this. But this has got to do a lot with state capacity. And lastly, in terms of these powers, then I argue that it's no longer okay for us in South Africa to talk about grand narratives in ways that we have in previous times. So, for example, we talk about whiteness as the issue because we're a country that has inherited colonialism and apartheid. My view is that while that remains a useful characterization of economic inequality in South Africa, it's no longer enough to explain what we must struggle against. My view is that these three broad power constellations are what we need to contend with, and they include, especially in the two, the power of political elites and the power of the so-called dangerous classes. They include these politicians who are saying they are existing to fight this. I don't know if I still have time, because then I could do this last slide that talks about the so what in this negotiation of priorities, among other things. Do I still have time, ma'am?
Yes, you can do and then wrap up. Thanks.
Okay, so I thought that I wouldn't bore colleagues by repeating the history that unfolded in front of us. We know that the GNU itself was a process of, maybe let me go back to the the idea of a holon that I spoke about earlier as I'm about to wrap up on this slide. So a holon, as Arthur Koester explains, has got two opposite tendencies in a system. One, a holon is a whole in itself. It is a theoretical construct that underscores this idea of parts who are wholes in themselves, but parts in relation to the bigger whole. Now, there are two opposite tendencies as far as Arthur Koestler is concerned. One, a tendency to integrate so as to function as part of a larger whole, so making compromises, working with others, a give and take process. That's one. And that was how South Africa was able to break, to set a world record as far as I'm concerned, or to at least contend for top position in the world for constituting a coalition government within 14 days. We mustn't forget how miraculous this was, especially when this coalition brought about two big factions of society now. The white voter bloc and the black voter bloc, sections of them, obviously. So this, to me, it shouldn't be something that we take for granted, because it took a lot of that tendency in systems to collaborate. Okay. But there's another tendency. There's a tendency to assert autonomy. And we saw this tendency happen in Gauteng. We saw it happen where, even though the ANC and the DA, among all the other parties, collaborated as systems do to create a government of national unity, that at provincial levels, it's interesting, especially Gauteng seems to be a hotspot for this autonomy and integration tendency. So in Gauteng, there was an assertion of the autonomy at a subnational level of the same political party at a national level that is actually tending towards integration and collaboration, which assert autonomy and says we are not going to collaborate on some other aspects. And then we're seeing this play out in municipalities. The bigger question, which I'm not going to answer today, but it's something that I'm focusing my analytical mind on, is at what point will there be some breaking, a flapping of the butterfly in one corner of South Africa, which has got consequences at the national level? This is why I've been saying my diagnosis of the political stability is a critical and somewhat stable, arrangement, because we don't know what flapping of wings somewhere at a subnational level is going to cause a tsunami that undoes what has been done so far in terms of the GNU. But what gives me comfort so far is that the political players have been negotiating consensus and sticking together. And foreign affairs, for me, is the most exciting aspect in which that is happening, where you find that politicians that had seemingly stood in opposition to South Africa's foreign policy with respect to the Far East as well as the Global South agenda are now singing in tandem with one another. And I'm saying that that's an interesting thing that we can also see on issues like corruption, on issues like priorities to advance or to accelerate development. And lastly, so the acid test, and this is where many of yourselves, colleagues, and our work collectively within the community of people that seek to build state capacity is going to come. The extent to which we can influence public officials who are assertive about who they are and their competencies, even as they play a collaborative and a submissive role, so that political leadership, because in the final analysis, it's politicians whom we vote for. So as they provide leadership to say, these are our priorities, public sector officials should have enough humility to give expression to those priorities and enough boldness and autonomy to resist every aspect of corrupting tendencies of politicians and business and themselves, by the way, so that the national interest can be achieved and the national priorities can be achieved. Last statement. I did work on the Guga project for my master's treatise, and I wrote that Guga presented to us an example of creative politicking in post-apartheid South Africa, where executives played enough of the political game to lobby and get resources for their mandates. That's okay, that is perfect. But stayed distant enough not to allow that activity of lobbying for resources for their departments, lobbying for resources for their entities to be corrupting. And I argue that what my finding was that these executives were committed more to the cause than to the personalities involved. And as a result of that, could manage the tension between effective lobbying and capture, which tends to be predatory. Thanks a lot. And I hope for opportunities for us to get closer to the NSG and others. We've already, I'm happy that the NSG has already established, for example, MOUs with different universities so that we can continue to do this work, as well as the Public Service Commission, among others. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that scene-setting input, that scholarly input from Dr. Ongama Mtimka. I forgot to introduce myself. Sorry, my name is Lakela Kaunda at the National School of Government. We will now move on. The DG DCOG had some challenges when we were starting. We are happy that I can see that he's been able to join us, DG of the Department of Cooperative Governance, which is also at times commonly known as COGTA because the ministry is COGTA. Mr. Mbulelo Changan, we are happy that you are here. Could you give us your opening remarks? Thanks. We had been told that the DG would be not available, but I see his name. Okay, it looks like someone joined using the DG's name. We will then move on. As I said earlier on, we are hosting this session in partnership with SALGA, and we are happy to have with us the Deputy President of SALGA, Councillor Xola Phakathi, who is going to talk to us about understanding the local government coalition expertise in terms of realignment of municipal strategies towards service delivery. How do we realign strategies towards ensuring the effective delivery of services in our municipalities in the context of the coalitions, which are not very easy anyway, as we know, to manage. Over to you, Councillor Phakathi.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kaunda, and greetings to the DG, Dr. Mtimka, and fellow panelists. Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm audible enough. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. We're quite grateful that the School of Government is hosting this debate today with us as SALGA, because we are of the view that this matter necessitates engagement in the public discourse. And thank you very much to Dr. Mtimka. Our approach is that coalition governments are not a new phenomenon at local government level, having been present since the first democratic elections on the 5th of December 2000. The 2016 municipal elections yielded the most dramatic results pertaining to coalition governments. What have subsequently happened post the November 2021 elections suggests that the shock that greeted the results in 2016 was simply an introduction of what would become a permanent feature of our political landscape. While the 2016 municipal elections and now 2021 elections redefined the local government political landscape in a dramatic manner, the extraordinary prominence given to those results is potentially misleading. The brief response is that on the extraordinary prominence is that looking at it on the surface, one would suggest an occurrence of a new phenomenon, whereas it is in fact looking at it much deeper and analyzing its impact, exposing our general neglect of this very important maturity development. It is noted with keen interest that this year commemorates 26 years since the release of the 1998 White Paper on Local Government. And despite the fact that every single municipal election gave rise to hung councils, no policy, legislation, or framework has been developed to provide guidance on coalition. It is common knowledge, Program Director, and general accepted that coalition governments are unstable, and among others, the following are the key developments. With the exception of the city of Cape Town and Buffalo City, 6 of the 8 metropolitan municipalities are governed through coalition governments. In Gauteng, for example, all metros are coalition government. In fact, with the exception of the Mid-Val local municipality, the remaining 10 are coalition governed. 33 months now into the new term of office, 24 of the 82 coalition government municipalities have experienced changes in coalition arrangements, with many more under imminent threat of change. Instability in coalitions have a severe impact as it compromises the ability of the municipality to adopt policies, to adopt bylaws, and make senior management appointments, and even adopt budgets. Coalition instability ultimately compromises the municipality's administrator's ability to deliver services to local communities. Linked thereto are the challenges in the administration, which include the ability to attract and retain suitable, skilled, and qualified senior managers, increased turnover at senior management level, resulting in instability in administration, premature termination of employment contracts of senior managers, non-compliance with legal prescripts and regulations, political and administrative interface, interference in administration and also in the political space, collapsing of internal control and oversight measures. Coalitions put strain on the planning of the administration because it is difficult to predict whether items would pass by resolution in council. A case in point is the development of the city of Tshwane, in particular in the 2022-23 financial year, where it was unable to timeously adopt its adjusted budget due to political instability. Local communities continue to bear the brunt of unstable coalition politics. The service delivery breakdowns, failure in provision of reliable and safe housing, water, sanitation, electricity, and refuse removal, failure in maintenance in roads and stormwater drainage, leading to more potholes and increased insurance claims and accidents. The decrease in competitiveness of municipalities in local and national economy, and the decrease in investor confidence, weaker economic growth, rise in unemployment, and levels of crime. On the Financial Governance and Sustainability Program Director, we see financial failure, cash flow challenges, inability to pay creditors on time, Those are visible manifestations of a systemic realities in many coalition-governed municipalities. For example, a very small municipality spending huge amounts on litigation with increasing debt owed to creditors and escalating ESCOM debt, while technical officials use their own vehicles and equipment to ensure that service delivery continues. Now, the affected citizens, we see a decrease in quality of life and standards, increased poverty and increased crime, putting more pressure on community health system, leading to civil unrest, increase in number of civic protests, raising levels of violence in communities, and illegal land occupations. We are proposing the following as SALGA as a response to coalition government. As a long-term solution, a legislative framework for coalition governments is an absolute necessity to direct or guide political parties in forming potential coalitions. In the absence of a legislative framework, as it is the case now, political parties and independent councillors are expected to establish coalitions while being uncertain about the rules or mechanisms needed to maximize incentives for cooperation in the coalition. This will in all likelihood sustain the instability and short-lived nature of coalitions. So a legislative framework is therefore undoubtedly necessary for more stable governments. The Census 22 results program director confirms that Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal continue to be the provinces with the largest population at 15.1 million and 12.4 million respectively. These are coincidentally also the two provinces with the highest number of coalition-governed municipalities. The same census confirms that 50% of our population live in 17 largest municipalities. Of these 17 municipalities, 9 are led by coalition government with a total population of 35.4%. If we analyze these statistics, it begins to suggest that a large part of our population resides in coalition governed municipalities. As cities continue to face growing environmental, societal, and economic challenges, with growing levels of demand for municipal basic services, and in the absence of an effective legislative framework for coalitions, we face the increased risk that sustained political instability will affect the ability of developmental local government to create sustainable human settlements which provide for a decent quality of life and meet the social, economic, and material needs of communities in a holistic way. While we are waiting the development of a legislative regulatory framework, the SALGA Coalitions framework developed in partnership with the Dalla Oma Institute in 2021 remains relevant as a guide to political parties in structuring their coalitions in practice. The framework was an attempt to provide an immediate response to the coalition-related challenges by guiding political parties not only during the coalition formation stage, but more so on how to promote stability during the life cycle of the coalition. As a framework that requires voluntary adoption by political parties, the SALGA coalition framework is really a short-term solution and remains relevant even in the post-2021 elections, particularly as outcomes of by-elections may result in the change of power in the municipalities, as recent outcomes of by-elections have indicated. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that input from SALGA, from the Deputy President of SALGA. Councillor Tola Pakati, you need to mute someone, I'm not sure who it is, okay. Thank you very much for that input and the very important points raised, particularly the problems that we encounter, which are based on the lack of a legislative framework governing coalitions. And it is good that government is working on the amendment of the Municipal Structures Act currently to provide for exactly that point that Councillor Phakathi is raising, which the Municipal Structures Amendment Act, for example, looks at defining what is a coalition, defining coalitions, proposing a framework for changing office bearers, like you can't have a mayor being removed after 6 months. When can you have a vote of no confidence? How do you run a vote of no confidence? It's fascinating that they are even proposing that voting should be by a show of hands, so that you don't have secret ballots which cause havoc. But someone who will tell us more about that, the policy shift, would be the DDG at DCOC, Dr. Kevin Naidu. Over to you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kawunda. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right, you can see my presentation.
Not yet.
And now?
Yes, we can see it now. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues, councillors on the call, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. So I've put together a presentation. That's gonna
Dr.
try.
Naidu, it's
Yeah,
not in presentation mode yet.
yeah.
Right, you can go now. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. So, colleagues, I'm going to try and see how best I respond to the topic, understanding the policy shift and building soft institutions to improve trust. But also touch on one or two things that Councillor Phakathi had made mention of in his input as well. So in doing that, I'm going to take the colleagues on the call through these various matters that I've outlined here. What exactly we believe that soft institutions are, how we are dealing with the policy shift, and then taking you through the policy and legislative pipeline that we have as a department and ministry. Dr. Kawunda has, pointed to one or two of the issues that we have in the Municipal Coalitions Bill, and then talk about directly responding to the topic around ethics and anti-corruption initiatives or work that as COPTA we are dealing with. So just to maybe start with a bit of background and to reference the subject, to say that since the advent of our democracy, there have been an emergence, evolution of various policy instruments, legislation. But when we look at the local government sector specifically, we would want to maybe say that our reference as a starting point was the introduction of the Local Government Transition Act in 1993. And in introducing that piece of legislation, we had tried to prepare the ground for the 1995-1996 municipal elections, but still under the system of local government that was still in place at that point in time. But then also that the Local Government Transition Act made provision for the pre-interim phase, the interim phase, as well as the final phases of local government. Now, this was the beginning, colleagues, to see how we would, through that piece of legislation, set the platform to address inequalities, but then also to see how we could use that as addressing the various pieces of legislation that was applicable at the time. Now, in the 4 provinces that we had, we had 4 different ordinances and various bylaws in place to deal with local government. In fact, some of the provisions in the ordinances that have not found expression in the legislation that we have now, the new order legislation, would still be applicable in certain instances. So guided by our constitution at the time, the 1996 constitution, but also the white paper on local government, that for us had provided the point of reference or the starting point to see how we then begin to introduce a new system of local government. It was also referenced by Councillor Pakati, but then were the assumptions that were made in the white paper on local government correct? One of the things that, has become problematic for us, and I think for stakeholders across the local government fraternity, was that the assumption that municipalities would be collecting a lot of their own revenue was wrong, because we see that that is not the case as things stand. And perhaps a little bit more about that in later on in the presentation. Now, the white paper on local government laid the basis for the development of legislation. And that what you see at the bottom of the slide there, the Demarcation Act, the Structures Act, the Systems Act, the Municipal Property Rates Act, the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act, all finds its origins in that white paper on local government. Of course, municipalities are also responsible for implementing various other pieces of legislation, a myriad of legislation that will come from other sector departments, be it water and sanitation, Department of Minerals, Energy, housing legislation, etc. Now, that which we have begun to do, and you will see that we have in the pipeline various pieces of legislation, is trying to see how we improve systems of governance, but also to build public trust in the system. So this just references our starting point being the Constitution, the white paper on local government, our blueprint, our mini constitution for local government at the time, but then the various pieces of legislation that flowed therefrom. So what is our understanding of the need for a policy shift? And perhaps I would have touched on it already by indicating where we come from as a country. So we need to understand that in this policy shift that we are looking at, or we are in the middle of, it is informed perhaps mostly by historical legacies that we have as a country, the social inequalities that are in place, things that we are trying to address through various interventions from government as a whole. Then secondly, the nature of the policy shift. Are the policies that we have presently still relevant? Are the policies relating to land reform, education, healthcare, economic development still relevant? And if we're able to answer those questions, we would need to see what informs that, what are some of the shortcomings, and then therefore see how best we're able to develop policy that is more in line with present developments, but also trying to see how we rectify things of the past. The policy shift will also need to be looked at in terms of what the government of national unity, the objectives are. And if you look at where we are presently as government, so in the past administration, we had the medium-term strategic framework, which we are now migrating into a medium-term development plan. But what would be finding expression in the MTDP? So my understanding is that in the government of national unity, when one looks at the collection of the various manifestos of the different parties that would be part of the GNU, one would need to analyze them, look at those things that are common to the government of national unity. And broadly speaking, that what would find expression in the MTDP. And then that would become the agenda for government. And that would then become what the policy shift would need to be gravitating towards. Thirdly, we then would need to see how we take that policy development processes, that which is on the agenda for the term of the administration, and how we then begin to implement. How do we then execute the policy that we would be developing, the various programs, etc. And core to that would be what the challenges are, what barriers we are confronted with in terms of how we would need to navigate around those things to ensure execution is optimal. Now, building soft institutions, what does that mean in practice? Building soft institutions for us would mean that you would need to see how best you would improve transparency and communication, and we can do that through having various interventions in place. One of the things that Dr. Kalwunda mentioned in the Structures Amendment Bill, and which we will also touch on in this input that I'm making, is that we have in voting in municipal councils a process of doing so by a show of hands. So removing the secret ballot procedure and to see how we improve transparency by a show of hands. Of course, we're now in 4IR, and there's various platforms that we can be looking at in terms of how we use that to communicate, to have community meetings, to use digital platforms, etc., and share information about policy changes. I think core to what we would want to see in building soft institutions is building accountability and integrity. And if you look at the three priorities that emanate from the MTDP, the issue of building a capable state, the issue of professionalization, the issue of ethics becomes core in how we would want to see programs of government unfolding into the future. Strengthening institutional capacity is also core in terms of how you ensure continuity, and that would be linking to the last bullet point on the slide. So having institutional capacity to ensure that you deliver, but also to build a pipeline of talent, career pathing to ensure that when persons do exit the system, there is continuity that is able to carry the organization and the institutions into the future. Fostering collaboration, both intergovernmental, extra-governmental, is also core. If you look at us as COGTA, we have also upscaled our collaboration with our various partners, be it SALGA, be it municipalities, be it provinces, be it National Treasury, and we believe that only through collaboration you would be promoting transparency, promoting communication, but also trying to see how you maximize resources within government to ensure that you have maximum impact in trying to deliver what is expected of us. Promoting ethical standards is also key. And later on in the presentation, which I will share with the school for distribution to persons on the platform, is promoting ethical standards. There's a lot of work that we have initiated in this regard, and I think if that can be replicated and multiplied across government and municipalities, we could be having a much more ethical and receptible system of local government out there. Providing feedback is key in ensuring that our communities are kept up to date, our stakeholders kept up to date in respect of all of what is happening in institutions. So what have we done, or some of the things that we have done in terms of improving trust as we build soft institutions? So we've picked up just a couple of interventions that we've introduced through legislation. And key amongst them would be how we deal with the appointment of senior managers in municipalities. This is provided for in the Systems Act. And what we've done is that we've provided through amendments through the legislation, but as well as issuing regulations, we've managed to introduce a competency framework for senior managers, but also prescribed qualifications and skills and competencies that these senior managers must have when being appointed. We've also built into the system of appointments for senior managers a role for the MEC in the province, but also a role for the Minister of COGTA. We have also, and you would have seen that this had received a lot of media coverage, excluded persons, senior managers from municipalities, and also extended it to all other staff, the exclusion of persons to hold political office in political parties. And perhaps to clarify that, it is not to say that municipal officials cannot belong to a political party. What we are saying is that municipal officials should not hold executive office in political parties. We've also introduced some time ago disciplinary regulations for senior managers. And so colleagues on the call may be asking, but why senior managers only on some of these things? So remember, a lot of these things are conditions of service for employees are within the domain of the bargaining council and something that we do not have jurisdiction over. It is only senior managers that we have jurisdiction over as COGTA. The MFMA had also introduced the establishment of disciplinary boards, and coupled to that, they've also issued regulations on financial misconduct procedures and criminal proceedings. And this are regulations that have been 10 years in the domain as well. As part of our oversight interventions, we have introduced through legislation a brand new section in the Structures Act that provides for the establishment of MPACs. So the MPACs are the Municipal Public Accounts Committees, or your municipal SCOPAs that we have in municipalities, and we've provided for specific functions that these MPACs must do. So it is obligatory for all municipalities now to have such committees in their municipalities. We've indicated that those chairpersons in your bigger municipalities, chairpersons of the MPACs, to also be appointed or could be appointed as full-time. I think significantly is that we've included or migrated from the Systems Act into the Structures Act, Schedule 7 of the Code of Conduct for Councillors. And in there, we have provided for various issues that of ethics that councillors should subscribe to. Importantly, we have developed regulations to take forward the implementation of the Code of Conduct, and this was issued last year. Importantly is that these regulations now that have been promulgated prohibit walkouts from councils. It provides for determining which of the financial interests of councillors may be made public, the declaration of gifts received in kind, and also various other matters. So if a councillor is found to be in breach of any of the provisions in the Code of Conduct, that councillor may be removed from office by the MEC for local government in the province. And if removed after a very specific process or very prescribed process, that councillor may not be eligible for entering public office or to be re-elected as a councillor for a period of 2 years. We've referenced in this slide how the breaches of the Code of Conduct should be processed, how the investigation should take place, and these are also set out in detail in the Code of Conduct for Councillors. Just in terms of our policy and legislative pipeline, we have these various bills that we are processing. The Intergovernmental Monitoring Support and Interventions Bill is a bill that looks at providing for how we would deal with sections 100 and 139 of the Constitution. It is a bill that has been under production for some time now. We eventually got cabinet approval to introduce the bill into Parliament. We got that approval towards the end of March of this year. It is presently with the State Law Advisor. And once we get that final certification, the bill would be on its way to Parliament. The Coalitions Bill that Dr. Kaunda had made mention of tries to see how we deal with the issue of hung councils, municipal coalition governments, and what we are trying to nudge provinces towards is to, in instances where you don't have an outright majority in a council, for that council to move towards a type of municipality where you would have a collective executive system of municipality. The General Laws Amendment Bill is a bill that was also out for public comment together with the Coalitions Bill. Both these bills were, the closing date for comments was the end of August. We're in the process of consolidating comments. And later this month, on the 25th and the 26th of September, we will be sitting with our stakeholders and go through each of the comments that we received to see how it finds expression in the bills, and then take it forward to the various structures for processing with the view to introduce these bills into Parliament before the end of this financial year. The Intergovernmental Relations Framework Amendment Bill is also a bill that is under construction. And here too, we hope to go to Cabinet to get approval to publish for public comments in the next weeks. I've made mention of the review of the white paper on local government, and informed by the assumptions that were, contested or incorrect, we are undertaking a review of the white paper on local government to see how we tackle comprehensively all of the challenges that we are experiencing in the sector, how it finds its way into the white paper, the revised white paper, and how various instruments that would require legislative amendment would then find expression in the General Laws Amendment Bill that we are working on. So hopefully that review would be running in tandem with the legislative process that we are working on, and at some point converge with the view to those policy deficiencies that we are looking at becoming law and then coming into effect with the commencement of the next local government elections in 2026. To maybe just touch on what the coalitions bill would be dealing with, but our starting point should be the state of hung councils in the country. Now, as Councillor Pakhachi had mentioned in his input, it is not a new phenomenon. We've had hung councils ever since the first term of local government. And increasing over time. And if you look at KZN and Western Cape, they have had hung councils or coalition governments ever since the first term that we've had in 2000. Of course, it gained prominence after 2021 with the jump from 27 in the previous term to 81 coalitions, hung councils that we have presently. Mention was also made of the work that was undertaken or commissioned by SALGA, together with the Dullah Omar Institute, and there were various recommendations that had come out of that work. A lot of those recommendations have found itself into the Municipal Coalitions Bill that we presently have on the table. Now, when you look at some of the recommendations made there, a lot of them you see panning out in the Government of National Unity that we have now. For example, after the 29th May elections, we saw various political parties coalescing, looking for partners, seeking coalition arrangements, and that was also a recommendation as a first round recommendation that came from the study. So you would see also that would be looking at the party manifestos. And as I've indicated earlier, a collection of those manifestos, the commonalities that would be in there have found itself expression in the MTDP that we have under construction, hopefully finalized by cabinet in the next month or so. The second round that has been recommended as part of the framework, and as we see on panning out now, is the agreement on a policy program, the distributing of political positions to cement the coalition, and then designing mechanisms to facilitate cooperation and dispute resolution. And I think mention was also made of this in the previous submissions as well. In summary, the work that SALGA and the Dullah Omar Institute had recommended or had, made proposals on indicates that a detailed coalition agreement should be in place, that the party with the largest number of votes to lead the coalition agreement, the content of the coalition agreement to be made public. And I think it is something that earlier on in the presentation, we said that, or I said that, is something that is a requirement for building soft institutions. To see how joint policy resolutions could be crafted, but also to have in place a dispute resolution mechanism. That there should also be consequence management for councillors, as well as clear grounds to terminate the coalition agreement if nefarious goings-ons take place. The coalition agreement, the recommendation that came from the study also said that the mayor and speaker to come from the majority parties, and I think we see that also unfolding in the executive as the GNU was being concluded. This slide here basically references the difference between a mayoral executive and a collective executive. So colleagues on the call would know that in a mayoral executive system, you have an executive mayor, which is elected by a full council. And the executive mayor, pretty much like the president, has the prerogative to determine how his MACO or cabinet is constituted. And then the executive mayor is supported by the receipt of reports from Section 80 of the Structures Act committees. Whereas in the collective executive system, you have the mayor that is elected from an executive committee. The executive committee, as you would know, is proportionally represented, proportionally constituted by the number of votes that parties would collect through an election. And based on that collection of votes, the executive committee of not more than 10 is constituted. So the mayor would come from that executive committee, but subjected to a vote in the municipal council. So here too, Section 80 committees submit reports to the executive committee. The bill then provides for a 2-year cooling off period for the calling of motions of no confidence against municipal office bearers. It is done by a show of hands, but also prohibits the elimination of frivolous motions of no confidence. In the comments that we have been receiving, many have said that perhaps the 2 years is too long. What if you have in place a speaker with EXCO that has committed something and you want to get rid of him immediately, or you want to put in place a motion of no confidence against him or her, then the 2 years would be something that would be prohibiting such removal. So it is something that we would be looking at in the discussions that we would have as we process the bill. The bill also makes provision for the conclusion of a binding coalition agreement, but it also provides us for having regulations to deal with the detail around this. The bill then also makes provision for the introduction of a threshold. Thresholds are not new. It is seen in the world over, but also thresholds are in place in countries on the continent as well. So if you look at Rwanda and Mozambique, they have a 5% threshold in place. But of course, the 5% would suit their specificalities in those countries. Now, we have indicated that a 1% threshold should be introduced. And so we've taken eThekwini as an example and showed what the introduction of a 1% threshold would result in. So we've highlighted in yellow across the slide. If you look at eThekwini as it stands, it has 222 seats. Of the 222, 199 seats are allocated to 4 political parties, and the balance of 23 are allocated to 19 parties. So if you introduce a 1% threshold, these 19 parties that received less than 1% would be eliminated, and then you would have a council made up of 4 political parties and the 222 seats. distributed amongst them. Is that rational? Is that fair to have 4 parties against 23? It is something that we would need to see how we navigate through as we finalize this. Of course, the threshold has been something that has attracted the most amount of comments. And tied to that is the issue of constitutionality. Do you want to exclude the voice of all of these persons that are expressed in the votes of these 23 parties and exclude them? Is that constitutional? So those would be some of the things that we would answer as we finalize that specific provision in the bill. So also within the theme of improving trust in this part of the presentation or the requirement is that as a department, we have with the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, a partnership with them. But also as part of the partnership, we have SALGA as well as the Moral Regeneration Movement. We also have the Legally Advisory Committee, the chairperson of being Dr. Father Mkachwa, and then the various persons represented there. The Legally had also developed the Code for Ethical Leadership in Local Government, and this was also then launched by the Minister on the 1st of March this year. The Code for Ethical Municipal Leadership, it is something that is applicable across local government. It is in addition to the Code of Conduct that we have in the legislation. This is non-statutory, but it is something that we believe we would want to introduce to ensure that as far as possible, we stretch ethics and integrity across local government. For interest, you can download this from the web. Other ethics and anti-corruption initiatives that we have is MFMA, PFMA workshops, which we last had in April and May. We are dealing with regulations in terms of Section 106 of the Municipal Systems Act. So for those that don't know, Section 106 of the Systems Act gives the power to provinces to investigate matters relating to maladministration, fraud, corruption. But it also empowers the minister. If the minister becomes aware of such maladministration, fraud, corruption, etc., can request a provincial government MEC to investigate that and to get a report in relation to that investigation. So how that would happen in practice, especially that which is required of the minister, we're trying to see how to provide guidance through regulation, and that is work in progress. We also, as a department, support and collaborate with provinces and law enforcement agencies. We also promote ongoing communication and awareness campaigns. Together, we're trying to see how we entrench this within the district development model. And in collaboration with SALGA and DPSA, we want to see how we introduce lifestyle audits at municipalities. Dr. Kawunda, as I conclude, I would want to say that although these policies are applied by the legislatures to advance, and I think across government, have noted with concern that implementation becomes and remains a challenge. We also know that there's instances where municipalities cannot fulfill their mandates due to the unstable coalitions that we have, infighting in councils, the political administrative interface challenges, poor governance, lack of accountability, and also, in some instances, lack of ethical leadership. This was also flagged in the report that had come from the Auditor General, but also in the State of Local Government report that the department generates. So to perhaps in the GNU and to share the COGTA experience, we have as a minister, Minister Vilinkosini Schlabisa, who comes from a party, and then we have two deputy ministers that come from different parties. The common amongst the three in the ministry is that they all come from royalty. So all three of them are princes. The experience that I have seen personally is that there is unlimited mutual respect and discipline amongst our three leaders. It is extremely interesting to watch our ministry engage and deal with issues, and the respect, Chair and colleagues on the call, is second to none. In fact, I have also been given a clan name, and my clan name is Chawe. Can't Touch This. I don't know if colleagues remember the song by MC Hammer, Can't Touch This. And I've put that there deliberately because in engagements that we have seen unfolding, we have seen that, in some municipalities, we have political challenges that are sometimes difficult to touch. And we believe that with the multi-party or the dual party leadership that we have, it could assist in going to areas by different principles to see how matters could be addressed. Of course, the professional drive that we have as a department through the various interventions that we are making. I've made mention of just the Systems Act professionalization, the competency work that we are dealing with. Together with SALGA, we want to see how we take this to another level. It is something that was also flagged by the Auditor General, and we want to see how those senior managers, those municipal officials that we have in municipalities are competent, have the correct qualification, and in fact, it is something that is on the MTDP as on the program of action for the next 5 years. Lastly, Chair, we call upon all government stakeholders and public servants, municipal officials, to uphold ethical conduct and professionalization as we strive to eliminate the persistent challenges related to lack of accountability, poor governance, financial management, all with the view to seeing how we build the ideal municipality. And in our view, this is what the ideal municipality should look like. The people, our citizenry being at the center of it, coupled with ward committees, and of course, a lot more we believe can be done around ward committees, what ward councillors are supposed to be doing as envisaged in the legislation, how municipal councils should operate within the highest standards of ethical conduct and professionalization, but then also supported by the various committees that we have. That would be on the political side. And then when you look at the municipal administration, how municipal managers, and you would know that their responsibilities are set out in legislation, but also supported by various functionaries, the administration side, to see how best we're able to deliver. The ultimate test of achieving an ideal municipality is when citizens receive all of those issues that we have indicated on the right-hand side. And of course, the foundation of municipalities are based on the entire Chapter 7 of the Constitution, but also coupled with various other pieces of legislation. So we want to also build communities of national unity through the government of national unity, and hopefully South Africa can become a leader when it comes to matters GNU related. Chairperson, thank you very much. That is my presentation. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation, which on all the policy framework, as well as the legislative framework that will supposed to take us towards building that ideal municipality that will provide the basic services that we need, while also creating the environment for local economic development and a better life for all. Let me remind, and yes, now we know you are Chawe, Siyabonga Chawe. And let me remind you panelists to please respond to the questions in the chat. You will see there's some questions that have been posed. For example, Tapsile Mia wanting to know whether some of the challenges you're all speaking about didn't exist before. Have they been exacerbated by coalitions, or they've always been there? There's a question to Kola, Councillor Kola Pagati, but he was on the road, so he was struggling. But this question can be answered too by other panelists as well, whether the coalition framework is that the coalition's framework that Chawe was talking about now may not be a silver bullet. Will it solve all our problems? And do we need a third majority to pass it? And Tapelo, that was important, Tapelo, Moate, they're saying we need oversight, municipal oversight above everything else. A request for the presentations as well to be circulated to all. So panelists, you will be required to. We request that we get the presentations. We now move on to the coalface, to the political leadership that is dealing with some of these issues on a day-to-day basis. We will start with Councillor Mncedi Mzwanana, who is the speaker at the City of Tshwane. Because I know that he has time constraints, he will need to be gone to another meeting by 11. Let me hand over to you, Councillor Mzwanana.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. And
thank you very much.
If possible, let us see your video. I see I have a question there. Why Councillor Pagati didn't have his video on? Thanks.
Okay. Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, I was going to say, I know you were having connectivity challenges there at Tshwane, but yes, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. No, in terms of sound, I'm okay. It's just I'm a little bit far. I don't know whether you see me or not.
Please proceed. We don't see you yet. Your team there can continue with that technical aspect while you proceed.
Thank you very much. Greetings to you, Program Director, and the protocol observed. Mine is not long, Program Director. I think I will stick on the time that you allocated me. The introduction on my presentation says the 2016 and 2021 local government election outcomes resulted to some municipalities with a no majority vote for any political party. Now, the coalition government functions better. Like-minded parties work together to achieve service delivery objectives. They are able to decide to set aside their differences and work together to tackle a community need in the interest of improving development in communities. In mastering modalities on encouraging a council with different political dialogues to reach consensus in voting for a budget in line with service delivery needs, it requires extraordinary leadership. The focus should be on the city's success rather than interest on the political or party needs. In other words, we are saying as the coalition parties or as a city that has experience on the coalition, I'll put it in experience if it even is a short while. It is very, very important to work together as parties in council. Like for instance, if there's something that we need to vote for, like a budget, we consult. And what is important is that the office of the speaker and the office of the executive mayor have to work together with the political parties and bring them on the table and discuss the budget and see where we agree and where we disagree. So I think working together on this issue, it's a very, very important thing because we are doing it on behalf of the communities. We are not doing it for ourselves. And the legislations and policies applicable for council. We've got Municipal Systems Act, Municipal Structures Act, MFMA, Council Rules and Orders, Constitution, Labor Relations, Governance, Regulations. These are the laws that are guiding us as the municipality. And for us to be able to manage the coalition, we need to stick on these laws and use them so that we can be able to find ourselves according to law. We don't do things that are outside the law. But what does the budget contain? There are two aspects to the budget. The first is the operating budget, and the second is the capital budget. The operation budget is used to fund the day-to-day short-term costs of municipality. For example, short-term costs are bulk purchase of water and electricity, infrastructure, maintenance and repairs, and general municipal maintenance. The capital budget proves towards planned expenditure on foundational services delivery costs. These are large expenses on large long-term purchases and investments, such as the purchase of land, the construction of road, recreational facilities, public clinics, and libraries, and more. Importance of reaching consensus for budget voting in council. The integrated development plan is a municipality strategy blueprint. The strategy objectives cannot be implemented without the annual budget. It is therefore imperative for municipalities to ensure that their annual budgets are output-driven and are in line with service delivery objectives as outlined in the IDP. The budget is the most important mechanism in giving effort to a municipality service delivery strategies, focusing on both the medium and the short-term plans. The coalition government agreement should focus on putting communities first, but to be the principle before the party needs. strategies to manage party differences for budget voting in council. Processes. It often includes discussions, negotiations, and modification to ensure that the budget reflects the needs and priorities of various stakeholders. In this point, what we are trying to say, in the case of Tshwane, we always seek a intervention by the community. We always bring together all political parties on the round table to discuss the budget, so that we align ourselves. So that we don't have any partisan interest. What we need to have is to put or prioritize the municipality, prioritize the community of Tshwane and at large. So it is very important that you bring your stakeholders together to discuss the IDP and together with the budget, so that whatever that we are discussing, we are in line to each other, to avoid not to go ahead to vote or to endorse the budget that is in front of us. We give an opportunity to everyone to have the input on the budget that is going to be tabled. Encouraging councillors to read and scrutinize the IDP budget report and annual report before council meetings. The council committees comprising of different political parties to meet before the council meeting takes place to discuss the budget report and scrutinize it. Arrange a special council meeting which focuses only discussions on the budget, annual report, and IDP. Collaboration, discussion, making a dialogue, encouraging open dialogue in council through a debate and discuss to address concerns, debate the budget allocation until different parties find common ground. Engagement, ensure that the different perspectives are considered, which can lead to a more equitable and widely acceptable budget decision. Transparency, ensuring that the budget processes is open and transparent, allowing stakeholders, in other words, communities, to understand how decisions are made. Inclusivity encourages input from diverse groups, which helps build trust and legitimacy in the budgeting processes. Negotiations involved resolving conflicts during council debates and reaching compromises where there are disagreement among councillors. Utilizing strategies such as adjourning council for a couple of minutes to allow consultation among political parties in the event of use of abuse language. The Speaker of Council may remove a member from the chamber in terms of rules and orders of council, or refer a member concerned to Rules and Ethics Committee for remedial action to be taken. Resolutions. Seek resolutions that address the core interest of communities, leading to more sustainable and acceptable budget decision. And Program Director, we find ourselves in Tshwane. I'll call it as a team. We work as a team. Of course, there are different ideologies from different political parties, but the main aim and the purpose is to deliver the services to the people of Tshwane and also engage them to any discussions that we have in terms of the delivery services. And we try by all means, like for instance, now we are in a process of Imbizos to engage the community so that they can raise their issues. And we also encourage the councillors to make sure that the inputs that are coming from the communities are there in a budget so that everybody can be happy. And we are saying, let us not impose what people want, but let us listen to what people are asking us to do, because they are the ones who are suffering in the ground. So now we are saying in the approach that we are taking in Tshwane, for now it is working for everybody. Where there are disagreement, we try to find ourselves to make sure that we align with the residents of the city. With those few words, Program Director, I thank you.
Thank you very much to the Speaker of the City of Tshwane, Councillor Mzwanana, who was talking to us on the topic mastering modalities of consensus in budget voting in line with core business in municipalities. We'll now move to eThekwini, the city, eThekwini Metropolitan Municipality, to Councillor Kosentle Madlala, the Chair of Governance, Corporate and HR Committee in the city of eThekwini. Over to you, Councillor Madlala.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaunda. We want to greet you and the fellow panelists, thank the organizers and for inviting us to make our contribution in this platform. The topic that we are to speak to relates to the budget, and we want to preface it by saying that when the Dr. earlier spoke, I think he quoted Marx. We want to also stand on that platform by saying that in analyzing society, Marx once said society in terms of the dialectics, one of the laws of dialectics is the unity and struggle of the opposite, where unity is conditional and temporal and struggle is absolute. And therefore, in our own analysis, local government is a contested space, both politically, ideologically, and otherwise. And everything that happens within that context. Now, maybe in introducing you to eThekwini as a metro, we are largely covered by input by Dr. Naidu, because first of all, we wanted to say eThekwini has 222 seats. The council has 222 seats divided between 111 wards and 111 PR. Now, he also covered us in saying that we are a unique metro in that we do not, we are not governed in terms of the executive mayoral system, but we are a collective committee system, executive committee system, which means that we've already had a situation where the executive committee, the 10-seat executive committee, was constituted by multi-parties, and therefore our decision-making process included parties, even when the ANC, for instance, had the majority in council. Now, when it comes to the issues of the budget, I think the budget itself is a contested process, in that when you go to do your IDPs in terms of your community-based planning at a ward level or at a zonal level, you'll find that communities, because of their differences, will be contesting what becomes a priority for that particular ward, that particular locality. Now, that contest needs to be resolved by the leadership in terms of showing leadership, your political astuteness, and ensuring that you prioritize public value. Now, Professor Moore said something about public value around the issue of it being a set of tangibles and intangible goals that municipalities or government and their entities will aim to achieve in order to ensure that the community problems are resolved, you better the lives of the people in your jurisdiction, and you improve the quality of life. Now, if we focus on the public value, as we debate around the issues of the budget, even at a community level, we are then able to sway the community towards some kind of consensus to say, maybe this one is more priority than the other one. Now, we take that experience along when we are doing our budgeting in the context that I spoke to, where we had multi-party EXCO, and although we had a majority, but you know, in 2016, when most metros in South Africa were going the coalition route, in eThekwini, the ANC still maintained its majority. However, in terms of led by the then Speaker and Speaker Mapena, there was a reluctance really to use the majoritarian approach to budgeting, where your dominant party, a party with the majority, will then use its majority to railroad other parties in terms of the budget. There was always that endeavor to seek consensus and to try and bring everyone on board. Now, I must say that that process is not easy. It's time-consuming at times. It can hinder service delivery because you then are going to be faced with a situation where you are supposed to pass your budget now, but you have to delay in order to seek consensus and do all of those things. Now, if that was happening when we did not have a coalition, can you imagine how it is now when we are in a coalition government? For instance, in the 2022-2023 budget, if memory serves, for the first time we couldn't pass the budget as a city on the first go because coalition parties in general at the council felt that there were issues here and there, and the parties that the ANC was in a coalition or is in a coalition with felt that, yeah, there are issues that needs to be clarified. There are issues that need to be firmed up in the budget. And therefore, the budget has to then be passed on a second go. And through the listening to the public participation process and the parties, we find that when we finally approved that budget, it was minus R500 million from the initial proposed budget, because then parties came back and said, no, the tariffs are too high, this is too high. And based on that, you then have to re-engineer your budget to accommodate your coalition partners and some of the communities they are coming from. Now, that was a time when the ANC was in coalition with the 22 seat smaller parties, as Dr. Naidoo has said, did a very good job for us there in introducing our municipality, because most of the metros in South Africa are governed in terms of the executive mayoral system and your mayors. So the understanding around the executive, collective executive system sometimes escapes some of us because we've never been exposed to them. So I think this webinar has assisted. We noted the presentation around the proposals that says maybe going forward, if you fail to secure your majority, you then will go our route. Now, if Dr. Kaunda will remember that Vodacom advert a while back, which was saying we've been having it. Now, what is being proposed is what, as eThekwini, we've been having all along. So there's a lot of learning that maybe can happen between other cities and ourselves, because We've been in this system, we've been in the multi-party EXCO, and because the multi-party EXCO gives semblance of a coalition already, even when you have a majority, because proportionally the other parties will then have a seat, and therefore your executive decision-making is going to include views from across the spectrum. Now, going forward, I think, so what has happened in terms of our budgeting, I was talking about the 2022-2023 budget, where we had to go back and redo the budget, and we lost R500 million in the initially draft budget, because we had to accommodate the views of other parties and other communities. Now, that is consensus building, in my view, because as much as you want to go ahead and use your majority, but you also understand that all the parties represent someone and represent constituencies that needs to be taken on board. In our case, as we said, it's the local government general is a contested space. In our case, we have two extremes, in that we are one of the few, if not the only metro that has around 60% of its jurisdiction under Amakosi, or traditional leadership, and the land belonging to the Ngonyama Trust Board. So you have close to 20 Amakosi in your jurisdiction. Those are key constituencies that you must take on board in your decision making, especially when we are doing your budgeting. That's a constituency that you must take on board. Now, on the other hand, you find that because of apartheid spatial planning and the apartheid laws that you know about, development tended to move around your major towns and major cities. And as a result, you'll find that when we are doing your budgeting, naturally, you'll have a contest between those communities that already had everything, and they want their everything to be maintained, the budget, the bulk of the budget to go to the maintenance of what they already have. And the communities that never had services, who are still waiting for coverage, and therefore there must be negotiations between, you must have political astuteness to understand those nuances, so that by accommodating one side of the spectrum, we are not alienating the other. It's a reality of our city. I'm sure it's a reality in other cities that your majority of your ratepayers, which is a huge percentage of your rate base, is going to be the previously advantaged communities and demographics. And in our case in South Africa and here in eThekwini, they are largely represented by your Democratic Alliance and these other parties. And therefore, whether they are in power or not, you need to then take them on board when they are speaking, because you will then have a situation like the situation we had last year, where some of the ratepayers organizations took the city to court, where they were applying for they approached the court to say the court must allow them not to pay their rates to the city, pay them to some fund, and then service their communities, because they feel that the city is overburdening them with cross-subsidization of other areas. Fortunately, sanity prevailed, and the court found in our favor. But that does not mean that you must ignore the sentiments that exist there to say the majority of your ratepayers feel that when you are allocating budget, you are not accommodating them enough. But on the other hand, those who've been excluded, you have a responsibility to take them along. And therefore, what we are saying, maybe as a lesson from our city, could be that one, you need political astuteness to navigate these nuances, so that you don't leave anyone behind in terms of your decision making, especially around major issues like your budget. Now, when we started having a coalition in 2021, like many of the participants here, it was a coalition between the ANC, which was sort of a majority party and a string of smaller parties. Now, there were growing pains that were experienced there in line with what Councillor Phakathi was saying in terms of your votes of your motion of no confidence, the emergence of smaller parties as kingmakers to the horror of the bigger parties that are participating closer to the party that nearly won the elections. And therefore, that needed to be managed. Now, those are some of the issues that will come about in the early stages of the coalition. But I think we managed to smoothen things out. And as things stand, with the introduction of the government of national unity at national and provincial level, I think we are beginning to get the trickle-down effect wherein the parties in coalition at national government are beginning to say, maybe we can then extend this to local government. Our last council meeting elected the leader of the IFP in our council as chair of one of the committees. That is an equivalent of an MMC. Now, that is the progress we've made since the early stages of 2021, where on our first meeting, we only managed to elect the speaker and the meeting was disrupted because parties could not agree. Then on the second, we only managed to form council on the second go in terms of that. In terms of our budget, as I've already articulated, we had to go twice to pass the budget. Now, from there to where we are today, I think it's a huge progress, meaning that there are learnings that can be taken from eThekwini, both from the fact that we've been a collective executive system and the learnings from there, and the fact that we are now in a coalition with not only the smaller parties, but also with the major parties, and it's beginning to bear its fruit. Of course, the problems that Councillor Phakathi spoke to will always exist because of the context I painted earlier, from the dialectical relationship that we'll have, that you are in a coalition with parties that want to see your demise, because at the end of the day, no other party wants another party to exist. So as much as you are collaborating and working together, you are getting consensus on issues, but there will be those undercurrents, and where you are vulnerable, they will take advantage, because as Umar said, in terms of the unity and struggle of the opposite, struggle is absolute, it's permanent. Unity is conditional and temporal, and therefore we must then maximize along the public value, along the areas where there's agreement among us, and see ourselves through. I think I'll end there, Doctor, and if there are questions, I think even on the question dashboard, one will be ready to respond to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I wonder if Karl Marx knew that he would be involved one day to talk about in discussions about coalitions in South Africa. Councillor Madlala and Dr. Mtinka, thank you so much. Yes, and indeed, eThekwini, you've been having it, as they used to say, that Vodacom advert, sorry, because this coalition bill says all hung municipalities must have a collective mayoral system, rather, instead of the executive mayoral system. Thank you very much. We will deal, panelists, let me see now, after the presentation we're going to have next, we will then take all the questions, so you will all be responding to the questions. But now we move on from dealing with budgets in the two municipalities to talking about audit outcomes in coalition municipalities. And to deal with that, we have the AG of SA's Ms. Sharon Adams. She's the head of portfolio for provincial regularity audit at the AGSA. Over to you, Ms. Adams.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and good morning. Program Director, my fellow panelists, and all protocol observers. Really a nice honor and privilege here today to share just some insights on the audit outcomes of the coalition governments that we have seen over the number of years. Let me just get the slides into the presentation mode. And I think in my space specifically, I think being involved in the audit environment, specifically in the local government space, for about 20 years, I have seen many things specifically in relation of coalition governments, and what I observed, I think in some cases it works out and some it does not work out as intended. But I will share with you some of the observations, and it was just interesting when we actually put this information together, how the actual audit outcomes looked. But I want to share with you a quote, and I think some of the speakers also quoted China a bit, and it's from the former President Deng of China, and he said the following: if you want to grow and develop any country, you need a stable environment. And I think that is something that he has said many, many years ago, that I think in our environment currently, it's still very relevant. I hope that in terms of these insights that I will share with you, that it will be relevant, and that these insights then will be able just to make us think in a different way when it comes to the coalition governments and what it is actually telling us. So I think at the center of it all, when it comes specifically to our accountability ecosystem, and I think as AGSA, we are very clear about the mandates of the municipalities and their role and responsibilities that they've got to play. And I think looking at this accountability ecosystem, and we're taking it from a leadership level, making sure the ethical posture is appropriate, making sure there's appropriate structures in place, making sure that there's skilled officials appointed in the position, and making sure there's proper IT governance framework, and that's from a leadership and oversight perspective. Then the middle part is all about the financial management part, and I think these are some of the key role players, which is our accounting officers, our senior managers, our official actually that's responsible for the daily and monthly transaction. And a lot of times that we have seen that as a result of the instability, also they don't perform their roles and responsibilities that they are supposed to, because there's no accountability that happens. So what we are very clear about to indicate, if all of these key role players play their role in responsibility in terms of the accountability ecosystem, the intended impact that you will have then an impact on service delivery. And with Team AGSA, we hope by the messages that we give in terms of our insights, by able to influence based on the insights that we have, and if instances where we are not adhered to, then we will definitely use our enforcement power. So in this whole system, it's important that each role player plays their part. So if the municipality has challenges or is not functioning as appropriately, there's a role that the premier has within the province. There's a role of COGTA, there's a role of FISI, and similarly also the provincial legislature, and then also national. So we're saying all of these role players, when each one plays their part, then we should have the intended impact on service delivery. What we observed over the number of years, we have seen in certain instances when there's coalition government, we have seen improvement in audit outcomes, but we've also seen deterioration in audit outcomes. So very interesting. And I think one of the key dominating factors that we find, the tone of leadership set at the top. And this tone includes both from a political and an administrative perspective. That is, I think, a key recipe that we've seen work in the past. What we've also seen that sometimes power enables. So in instances where you basically have witnessed and you've seen when these appointees happens, they're actually there to impact service delivery on the ground, or sometimes power disabled. The disablement is more about what is in it for me. I'm now in power. How can I get hold of the purse? So that is also in some instances that we've seen over the number of years. So this map here that I've got in front now, we've looked at the ISC election results of 2021. So that is the information that we've used in terms of who are the hung council across the country. So I know some of the information has changed, but then we've looked at about 36 municipalities that at that point in time had hung council, and what is their outcomes telling us. I think noting that the previous speakers has also indicated in the Gauteng region, we've got about 72% of the municipalities in this position, followed by KZN with 54%, and then the Western Cape at 50%. And I think the lowest rate is in the Eastern Cape with about 5%, where we've seen coalition governments. But I think the interesting slide now would be the next one that I will be presenting that we've got in front of us. And noting where there is coalition government, so we've analyzed the information where we've looked from 2021 since the administration came into power with the recent information that the Auditor General has basically tabled on the 27th of August this year. And I think what we have seen, and it was just interesting, this comparison compared to the rest of the municipality, is the audit outcomes difference. And I think surprisingly, when I was also looking at this information, it is actually not different. If I look at overall the percentages of those with clean audits, unqualified, with findings, the qualified, the adverse, and disclaimed, it's more or less the same percentages if you compare it with the total number of municipalities. So clearly, I think it gives us an indication that from this data and this analysis, that in certain cases, yes, there is an impact, and in certain cases not. And I think if you look at the audit outcomes of the hung council specifically, it's very similar to the audit outcomes of even where we've got stable councils, where we've got one political party dominating. So I think this is quite an interesting analysis in this regard. I think overall, yes, we've seen a net decrease compared to when the administration started with about 8 and then 6 improvements. And then in instances also where we've seen the improvements, what we have seen in these instances where these improvements has been demonstrated is, number one, the leadership from a political perspective and administrative leadership that has an impact to drive specific things within the specific municipality. Similarly, I think where we've seen the deterioration in some of these cases, so we've seen even where audit went from a clean audit outcome to one of unqualified with findings to one with qualified with findings. And I've also seen instances where auditee went from a disclaimed audit opinion to a qualified, to an unqualified with findings, or sometimes even to a clean audit. And that had to do mainly because of the tone of leadership. What we've seen a lot of times in these instances, what went wrong, is a lot of times the structural issues, how the structure is set up, the roles and responsibilities a lot of time not being clarified, and the key focus, and I think one of the Honorable Mayors spoke about it, is not a key focus on the service delivery, that the citizens is at the center of all of it. What we've also seen in the cases where there's hung councils in this continuous changes. So when these changes happened, what we've observed that immediately there's an investigation against the municipal manager, CFO, and the head of supply chain management. So that is a trend that we've seen a lot of times when these changes happens then at the rapid pace. So at the center of it all, I think the key message that we want to advocate that at the center of it all, the service delivery to the citizen should be mattering. And at the end of the slides, I'll basically touch a bit on the root cause analysis. If I then go over then to the next slide, and I think in terms of the compliance to laws and regulations, we still see, I think, very similar when we see from the other audit outcomes, similar that is quite a big trend still where municipalities are not complying with the laws and regulations. And looking at this results, in some of the instances we see improvement, in some of the instances we see regression in some of the areas. But at the main source of it all, we still find major issues when it comes to the prevention of unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We just continuously seeing this growing trend, and then on the quality of the financial statements. So I think similar looking at this findings from a procurement and contract management, similar findings that we would find from the other audit outcomes. The other picture, I think, looking at the performance information is the performance planning. And I do believe this is critically important because it deals with the core of the service delivery part. Coming from our NDP, where specific priorities was there, linking it back to the NTSF, coming into our IDPs for the municipalities, and then that translating into a SDBIP. It's my firm belief, and this is quite an area that I'm passionate about. If you look at the service delivery aspect of those are the things that was committed to the municipality, to a community that will be delivered, and you make that trend then to say, in terms of the trajectory, what was committed, was it delivered, and was the budget then appropriately managed and spent? And I think that will then give you a clear analysis about the service delivery that should be happening at the municipalities that is not happening. I think even when we analyze this information, comparing it from the other municipalities to these with hung councils, we see a very similar trend. First of all, where there's challenges when it comes to how the indicators and targets are developed. And it's my firm belief this is something from a COGTA perspective, that can be addressed, because service delivery from one municipality to the next is exactly the same. So in the last year also, we've got some of them that didn't submit performance information, hence then the credibility of this information cannot be tested. Similarly, when it comes to the credibility of the information, still a lot of findings that is very similar to those of the other municipalities. And I think interesting from this specific slide, because this actually gives you a clear indication why we have so many service delivery challenges. The service delivery challenges speak to, if we are not able to confirm that we've delivered the service to the citizen, it's credible, then this is the result then from an audit outcome perspective that we come into the conclusion based on the evidence that was submitted, or in certain cases we don't even get information to audit, we cannot then make a conclusion that you actually have delivered the services to the citizens that you were supposed to deliver. So I think this was also a very interesting analysis. When we were looking at just the unauthorized, irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and we see a lot of our municipalities specifically struggle in the area of unauthorized expenditure. And unauthorized expenditure is basically where you don't have budget to spend, but you spend the money. And a lot of instances that we see, this impacts service delivery that the next year's budget is already being tapped into. And as a result of that, whatever that you're committing to the citizens for the current year will not be delivered, because 30%, 40% of the budget has already been tapped into, then result in the unauthorized expenditure. I've also then indicated who are the top contributors of these expenditure, and then we see the city of Tshwane, city of Joburg, and then some of our other municipalities within the country. So similar, I think, to the others, very similar in terms of the audit outcomes when it comes to the area of UIFW and how this matter has been dealt with. The next slide will basically deal with the material irregularity, and it was just important to make this analysis to say, when we look at the hung council across board, have we issued specific material irregularity relating to, number one, was there any financial loss as a result of fraud, theft, or breach of fiduciary duty? Was there any material irregularities that we issued as a result of harm to a public sector institution or harm to the general public? And in certain cases, for our material irregularities, we can actually refer to a public body for further investigation, which we have done with a number of them. And then we also issue recommendations in our audit report for these respective municipalities that has these material irregularities. And then also over and above that, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, we also go to a step of remedial action. And then lastly is we would issue a certificate of debt. But I always say, if we get to the point of certificate of debt, we're sitting in a situation that all of the role plays in the accountability ecosystem has failed, that we actually get to that point of the certificate of debt. The next slide basically deals with the material irregularity that we've issued as at 29 February 2024 for these specific hung councils. So you would notice that in total that we've issued about 96 material irregularities of the 360. So quite a bit of material irregularities that has been issued in this regard, with about 1.4 billion of losses that has been identified. We've also then issued a number of material irregularities where there was harm to the general public, and this specifically relate to our wastewater treatment plant at some of the municipalities that we've issued, and then also a number of material irregularities that we've issued in instances where we didn't get submission of financial statements, and we've seen that specific trend a lot in the Northern Cape, in the Free State, and in the Northwest. So we started to use this material, our material irregularity tool, to issue the material irregularities where they don't submit the financial statements of time, because if it's not submitted on time, decision making cannot happen, credible information cannot be assessed, and as a result, it does have a direct impact then on service delivery that's supposed to go to the citizen. I think if we look at the trend analysis, I think similar to the other municipalities also, when we've actually issued this material irregularities. The key thing I think from us still for this Hung Council, what we have seen, and similar to our other municipalities, is the inadequate skills and competency, and I think it was spoken about today in terms of what are some of the initiatives, and also then from Team AGSA, we will doing further analysis to look at this, looking at the skills and competencies, looking at the council, the consultants, and what further analysis we need to make. We've also seen the second one, which is in terms of governance failures. And this speaks about the different roles and responsibility that always doesn't work out as it's supposed to in terms of the mandate and in terms of the roles and responsibility that we see a lot of times. And the third one was on consequence management. And here again, with this Hung Council's part, also where we've analyzed these statistics, we still see quite a big chunk of unauthorized, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, irregular expenditure not being investigated, and appropriate action then not being taken against this official. So one of the suggestions also that was done previously is about establishing these the boards basically to do these investigations in terms of their role and responsibility, so that we can deal with some of the irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure and unauthorized expenditure. So I think a very interesting analysis, but what we've seen from a trend analysis, when you compare the outcomes of the other municipalities to the Hung Council, it's very similar. So I think it boils down to making sure that the leadership tone at the top is driven appropriately. Those basic controls are in place. And a lot of time what we find that even though there is some turmoil or uncertainty, there's still administrative part that's supposed to do their work. So I think one of the things also from a skills and competency level is the proper performance management system in place to hold people accountable. So thank you so much, Program Director. That is the end of my presentation. So back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation and that briefing. We will now deal with the questions from the attendees. The first question that I have, two questions that I will put to Dr. Mtimka, Councillor Mzwanana, and Councillor Madlala from the chat group. The first one, that question which is asking whether there've always been problems in municipalities, or have these been exacerbated by coalitions? And she argues that some of these administrative challenges are not new. They have always been there. So are we blaming coalitions for what has already been there? And then the second question had been on the coalitions framework that Dr. Naidu was talking about. Oh, Dr. Mtimka has left. So Councillor Mzwanana and Councillor Madlala, you'll deal with the second one. Is this framework that is being, this new legislation that has been introduced, that is in process, is it a silver bullet for all the problems that you've diagnosed, that you've been speaking about? How do we fix institutional culture? For example, where municipalities put under administration still remain dysfunctional. A question from Portland. If you could deal with those two, Have these problems been exacerbated by coalitions because they've always been there? Is the new legislation governing coalitions going to be a silver bullet? If so, how come? Because we've been putting municipalities under administration, the problems would still persist. Councillor Madlala, followed by Councillor Mzwanana.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Let me start with the new proposals. They are not a silver bullet. They will not solve all problems because some problems exist outside of which party is in charge. They are structural and systemic, and therefore different solutions need to be found to deal with those problems. So some of the you cannot legislate ethics, for instance. There's something else that you need to do to deal with the lack of ethics, and therefore the straight answer is that they're not going to solve all our problems, but they are a step in the right direction in fixing some of the issues, structural issues that we've been dealing with, and we can then going forward add to some of those. My apologies.
Sorry.
On the second question, Dr. Kaunda, which speak to are these problems as a result of the coalitions or they predate that? Most of these problems existed long before the coalitions. Some of them are then being thrown up now in terms of the presence of coalitions, because one party has been able to, when it was dominant, was able to then push through decisions. Now that they've lost power, you find everyone jostling for power. It also, some people have argued that those who are arguing against coalitions to say that maybe a coalition is better if it's between bigger parties because they have caucuses, they have structures, and they have sort of systems that you can tap into if you are in disagreement. But now you'll find a situation like in eThekwini where the ANC was in a coalition with smaller parties, some with one seat, and the person who's taking that seat is the president of that very same organization. So the organization doesn't have a caucus within council, which you can then tap into in terms of the whip and all of those things. Then it's problems that are going to be experienced as growing pains if coalitions are going to be among us for a very long time. But I agree that I don't agree with a posture that says coalitions have created all of these problems. Most of these problems predates coalitions, just that the mechanisms were there to fix them, some of them, like your majority vote and all of those things. Now they don't exist. It then throws up all of these problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mzwanana. If he's still here, because he was going to leave early. Okay, I don't think he... Oh, sorry. I think he has left. We'll move on to a question for you, Chawe, Dr. Kevin Naidu. There was a rejoinder to that question on the legislation, the new coalitions legislation, whether don't we need a 2/3 majority to pass this new legislation? I think it's a Section 76 bill rather than one needing a 2/3, but let me not answer for you. Could you respond to that one? And then another question to you from Bulelani Bunyonyo is dealing with Section 106. Is there a defined process plan from Section 106 1A MEC notice to Section 106 1B MEC investigation, which would be applicable where council ignores a request for information from the MEC, or the information provided by council necessitates an investigation in respect of Section 106 1B? Dr. Naidu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaunda. On the first question around the 2/3 majority, maybe before that. So the way we see it, the bill will be most likely classified as a Section 76 bill, but the prerogative to do that is actually Parliament. So when the bill is introduced into Parliament, it goes into the joint tagging mechanism, and that committee would decide whether it's a Section 75 or 76 bill. Now, whether there would be a 2/3 majority that would be required, of course, if the provisions are going to be amending the Constitution, you would know that to amend the Constitution, you would need a 2/3 majority and 6 of the 9 provinces to support. But as things stand, the only matter that we believe is of a constitutional or something that enters the constitutional domain is the matter relating to thresholds. So we're neither here nor there yet in terms of whether the final bill will be proposing a constitutional amendment. We're not sure if the 1% threshold would still be something that would find itself in the final bill. And of course, before we even go to Parliament, we would need to test the bill and its constitutional compliance with the Office of the Chief State Law Advisor. And if they raise constitutional matters, we would need to see how we would process that. So the long and short of it is, if there are amendments to the Constitution, then you would require a constitutional bill, and that would be subjected to a requirement for the 2/3. The issue around the Section 106 investigations, and therefore, Chair, I had indicated in the presentation that as a department, we are in the process of developing regulations to deal with Section 106 because we believe that it is still too vague in terms of how that section should be implemented. So while Section 106 1B provides for the MEC to look into the matter and to designate a person or persons to investigate the matter, in the past, we would see that the notice setting out the investigation that the MEC would publish in the Gazette would provide these various time frames, who should be conducting the investigation, what would be the focus of the investigation, etc. Coupled with provincial legislation, and I am aware of the Western Cape having provincial legislation to deal with such matters. We would need to see how the regulations that we are talking about provides that kind of detail. In fact, we're even considering amending Section 106 to provide for even in instances where the 90-day period. So presently, Section 106 says that if the minister asks the MEC to conduct an investigation, and if the MEC fails to do so within 90 days, it's only then that the minister can conduct the investigation on its own. So we're reflecting on that to see whether the 90 days is workable, and if not, reduce it so that the minister can intervene, or to find other mechanisms or other provisions to give the minister the power to investigate these issues of fraud, maladministration, and corruption in municipalities. So to answer the question, the detail that perhaps the colleague is looking for is provided for when the province appoints or undertakes the investigation. But second to that, that peculiarity, that detail is going to find itself in the regulations that the department is working on presently. Thank you, Dr. Gawanda.
Thank you very much. We now go to a question for the AG, Ms. Adams. A question dealing with oversight, that there should be a municipal oversight is important first before everything. Do you think there is enough oversight over municipalities? Are there enough controls? If so, why are we regressing, and what is the AG doing to provide support? That oversight question, which came from Tapelo, saying, I think there should be municipal oversight before everything else. Over to you, Ms. Adams.
Perfect. No, thank you so much for the question regarding oversight. And yes, what we have observed, I think, over the number of years, when it comes to the oversight part, in certain cases it's ineffective, and in certain cases it's not effective as intended. And I think going back then to legislation, I think the legislation is very clear when it comes to specific oversight and roles and responsibility. And the challenge that a lot of times that we see with the oversight, from an oversight perspective in terms of the reporting line, because when you get to the governance arrangement, specifically at the municipality, we've got the municipal council that ultimately has a key role in responsibility from their oversight perspective. Then within that municipal council, there's specific committees that feeds into that municipal council. Some of it being the impact that also plays an important role. From an oversight perspective, we've also got the audit committee that plays an important role, and other governance structures that plays an important role. What we have found a lot of times when it comes to the oversight, and you could see even from our reporting, when it speaks to the credibility of the information, and this is where I do believe sometimes the challenges are. So from an oversight perspective, if the credible information is then not submitted for reporting purposes and for decision making, that then has a direct impact on the effectiveness of the oversight process. So in terms of the reporting, one of the key reports that goes to council for consideration relating to the section 71, which is on the financial position and the spending, and the 72, which deals with the service delivery part. So if that information is then fed to, and that information is not credible, then that has a direct impact on council in terms of decision making, thinking everything is in order, the things are going to plan, there's no overspending on money. But when the year-end process happens, it's a total different ballgame. So here, in terms of the oversight structures, it's important that each role player, your internal audit, providing that oversight on the assurance from a control perspective and the credibility of the information that is submitted, would then play a critical, vital role in that regard from an oversight perspective. So this is in these cases that we see that oversight is not effective because the information, first of all, provided is not credible, that then results in not appropriate decision making. In some cases, then decision making also takes long, that then impacts on the service delivery. So I do agree in terms of the strengthening of the oversight, but there is clear, even from the National Treasury Circular perspective, clear roles and responsibilities that's been identified and clarified, and who must do what as part of this oversight responsibility, and making sure there's continuous transparency in the reporting, because from that, I think this information ultimately is for the public consumption. And how do we make sure when there's any challenges? So a lot of times what I do find from an oversight perspective is a lot of positive reporting that happens and not the crux of what's going on. So if there's more transparency in the system, this then also supports decision making where the focus must be. And I think it is I agree that oversight should be strengthened, going back to the roles and responsibility, making sure that they do function in terms of their mandate, and then assessing then that effectiveness of their role and responsibility. Thank you so much, Program Director. Back to you.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we have done exceptionally well with time because we've now come to the point of wrapping up. Let me also indicate that those who've been requesting copies of the presentation, some have been loaded already in the chat, so you can retrieve them there. They are available. But we've come to the end. Our principal has connection issues there, so he is not able to join us. He's in Durban. But I really want to appreciate the participation of our panelists. All of them are incredibly busy, which is why some have left us before we could even finish. They did indicate that they won't be able to join us till the end. We are joined, all of us here, by one goal, and that goal is to build the ideal municipality, which will ensure that basic services are provided for an ideal municipality to ensure the better life that we were all promised in 1994 at the dawn of freedom. And that ideal municipality was outlined by Dr. Naidu there. But if you asked my mother or any citizen, she will tell you she wants a municipality that will provide all the basic services. Electricity, when we wake up, it must be there. Water, good roads, no potholes, refuse removal, all the streets must be clean. The bylaws must be respected. I shouldn't just put up my little spaza shop on the side of the road and nobody does anything about it. Ne? So those are what constitutes the ideal municipality. Local economic development, if anybody wants to open a business, they should be able to do so. So I'm happy that all our panelists, because they were struggling from various streams, from academia to the department itself, COGTA, which is responsible for the institutional development, policy, legislation, up to very happy to have our councillors who are responsible on a day-to-day basis for managing these municipalities of ours, which is why then the input has been very enriching. For example, on budgets, how do you manage a budget in a coalition situation, which is what Councillor Madlala and Councillor Nzwanana were able to share with us. So it's been an incredibly informative and enriching discussion. And with the AG also reminding us at the end of the day, good financial management, prudent financial management, effective and clean governance is what we require. An ideal municipality shouldn't have a disclaimer. Officials must know where the money goes, where the money was. So those controls are very, very important. And with regards, and also ethics, the discussion of ethics, it's good that there's a code of conduct. Anything we do without that foundation, that moral foundation, it will be difficult to achieve our goals. And so it's effective governance, administration, effective financial management, which will then ensure that we build the ideal municipality that will make our lives what we all envisage as we wake up every morning and as we go to bed. Let me not take further time from all of you. We really appreciate all our panelists. We appreciate everyone who attended this session. We know you could have been somewhere else, but you chose to join us. It is very important for us. We have these master classes from time to time as the NSG because we take thought leadership very importantly so that we come together, share lessons, share ideas. As I said, we've done one on the GNU at a national level. This one now is lessons from coalitions, because there already are coalition governments, and indeed, there are lots of lessons that even the GNU will glean from the experiences of our, we call them hung municipalities, sounds rude, coalition municipalities. So with sharing ideas like this is how we grow, and as NSG will therefore continue to provide such a platform for us to get together and discuss. Much appreciated. We've ended much earlier than we thought, for which I am grateful to our panelists for keeping to the time. We are done. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.